Hello, everyone. Welcome to Agile Principle Run and Cut Live with your friends Roy and Phil. How you doing, Roy?
I'm doing great, Phil. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Can't complain. I'm glad we're here for our very first meeting live with our friends on YouTube. So, Roy, what are we going to start off with today before we talk to any of our friends watching live?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about Agile values, principles, and practices, the difference between them, why they're important. I know a lot of folks want to talk about the practices and they dive in right there, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about before the practices that make those practices possible. And to me, this is a very important topic because so many organizations are let's go Scrum, let's roll Scrum out to the organization, and they don't think about some of the organizational changes that need to go in, and that's where your values and principles really come in. So that's what I would like to talk about today, Phil.
Gotcha.
So,
Well, let's
yeah,
go.
sound good? Yeah, good. All right, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the differences, so values, principles, and practices. So the practices are easy, right? Those are the things that we do, like Scrum and Kanban and XP and Safe and Discipline Agile, all those other kinds of things that you can do. Those are the various practices. But at a higher level, there are things that we need to understand about ourselves, to understand our behaviors, what governs our behaviors, and that's where your values and principles come in. And the values are those things that you view as defining your character, defining your behaviors. And those are really important, from a personal level, but also from an organizational perspective. Now, a lot of companies have their corporate values, that nobody ever pays attention to, right? You get the right. So we're not really talking about those. They're sitting up on a poster in their marketing activities, things like that, and people don't really pay attention. We want to actually use these values. So that's what your values are for. And now the principles are those things that kind of govern your actions, right? They're the behaviors driven by your values. The values drive your behaviors, and those behaviors then drive your actions, which are the practices, right? So that's kind of how all these things fit together. Now, the reason I bring this up is that we talk a lot about the Agile Manifesto, and there's a little bit of discussion about the manifesto. It's getting a little bit old, right? It's been out there almost 20 years now. It's done 2001, so almost 20 years old. And there's some people that say, hey, we really should update it. And a lot of those conversations were shut down, that kind of stuff. It does need to be updated. The Agile Manifesto was written specifically for software. And there's value in that, but there's also value in changing over the course of time, right?
Right.
And I know we've seen some changes. The agile world itself has changed, so the manifesto should change as well. What are your thoughts, Phil? Should the Agile Manifesto change? What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, just looking at the way things have changed over the past 5 years in the world, discussions that used to be had that cannot be had anymore, words that could be mentioned that cannot be mentioned anymore.
Yep.
That just tells you that the way we interact as humans is greatly affected by the times we're in. And since communication and human interactions at the heart of Agile, I believe very strongly a number of those things should change. Like we've had on other episodes where we've talked about controversial topics that are no longer used, or things that are no longer said or used as illustrations. I think in the same vein, there's a lot that could be brought to the table to change in a positive way the manifesto, so that it's not just software focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And Agile got started in the software world, and that's great. There were other indications, like Lean got started outside of that, manufacturing, things like that. But Agile got started in software, and there was value in creating the manifesto. But it's been mutated over the years, and there are a lot of people that feel that it's just not the way that it should be anymore, and it is very software focused. So maybe it's time for us to change it. Now, they have had conversations about changing it over the years. I think it was back in 2013. They were talking about trying to get rid of the word software, and that kind of got shot down. I personally don't teach it as just software anymore. It's more product, because Agile's everywhere now. It's not just in software, and it should evolve as you know, over time. So now what we're talking about with the Agile Manifesto, if you're not familiar with it, go to agilemanifesto.org. It was an artifact that was written back in 2001, and it has 4 values and 12 principles. Very useful stuff. I get lots of value out of the values and principles. But let's talk very quickly about the 4 values. There are 4 values and 12 principles. The 4 values are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and then responding to change over following a plan. Now, these are great things. These are all good things. And I say it all the time. This is not just about Agile. You should look at the manifesto as being useful for building your organization, right? These are great things to think about from an organizational perspective. And then the 12 principles further refine these values to be more about things, like, higher motivated individuals, customer satisfaction, learning, quality, all these kinds of great things are all very valuable things. But nowhere in the manifesto we talk about practices, right? And that's intentional, right? There's dozens and dozens, maybe more, of practices that are out there. This is all about the values and principles that guide our actions, right? That's the intent. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that there are actually a number of different Agile values and principles out there. It's not just the Agile Manifesto. And it was interesting that you mentioned something. You mentioned the heart of Agile, right? So that's actually another one. There's the heart of Agile, and this was put out there started by Alistair Coburn. There's been some recognition in the community, and I'm one of these folks that also feel that we need to change. Where the manifesto was a little too specific, and maybe we need to back out of it a little bit and go to the heart of Agile, the real intent of what Agile is about. The heart of Agile. If you're interested in that, go to heartofagile.com. It's good stuff. I think it's some really, really interesting stuff. Alistair broke this down into 4 specific values: collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve. That's it. Right? No principles behind it, just collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve. So does that sound like anything familiar to you, Phil? What do you think? So do those concepts come from anywhere? What do you think?
It sounds quality driven. It sounds PDCA.
There it is. Yeah. Plan, do, check, act. Exactly. So I'm going to say something that's going to sound derogatory. It's not in any way meant that way. A lot of the other works out there, and there's several of them that we're going to talk about. They are derivative, right? So they are derived from other works, and that's not a derogatory thing. It is simply that, most new things come from other things, right? And this certainly Heart of Agile did, and some of the others did as well, right? So what do you think, Phil?
I absolutely agree. What about those from our friends at the Scrum Alliance? Can we talk about those values that they have?
So Scrum also has a set of values. These are their Scrum values, right? And those values are courage, focus, as you have up on the screen: courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. So again, if you look at those things, what does that have to do with Scrum? What does it have to do with Agile? It's really not. It's really about the behaviors, those things that we should look at in ourselves, our character, the way that we should act as individuals, and maybe the way our organizations should act as well. What do you think, Phil?
I agree. At the organizational level, we could do with a lot more value reinforcement, because when organizations look at these practices, they're just looking at practices to implement without any precursor. And I think the values and the principle and the mindset, going back to Alistair's heart of Agile, you hit the nail on the head. I think that is most important, because a lot of organizations, they just see zeros and dollar signs, but they're missing the heart of Agile, which is people, because we do these things for people and to add value to people, not to add revenues to the company. That's okay, but our major focus needs to be people oriented. So I really like this, Roy. So is there one place where all of these live that we can actually get all of these together side by side?
Interesting. There isn't. There's no one place to say, here are all the values that exist, and there are others as well. We've talked about the Agile Manifesto, Heart of Agile, the Scrum values. There's others out there as well. There's another one that I rather like called Modern Agile. This was put out by Josh Karievsky, and I'm probably murdering his name. I don't know him, but he has had some great stuff. And if you're interested in that, go to modernagile.org. I actually really like this one, the phrasing of this one, because it starts out with make people awesome. I like that one, right? Deliver value continuously, make safety a prerequisite. And I want to talk about that one a little bit. Experiment and learn rapidly. Now, I really like this one, right? Because this is making people awesome. So there's a lot of stuff in the manifesto that goes into make people awesome, right? We want to build great teams. We want to, educate people, make sure they're given opportunities to learn, delivering value continuously. That's all of Agile. And we should be doing that in traditional approaches as well, right? That's not just an Agile thing. Make safety a prerequisite. Now, this one's really important too, because we're not just talking about physical safety here. We're talking about psychological safety. A place where people can say whatever the heck they need to say to fix problems, sometimes controversial things. We're no strangers to controversy. We like talking about those controversial things because that's how you solve problems, right? You talk about the bad stuff. That's where you solve problems, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then finally, go ahead, Phil. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, it sounds like maybe someone should put all of these side by side together, maybe a matrix or a table, because there's so much to learn from each one. I like the make people awesome. I mean, it just covers a whole number of principles and ideas, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I actually do have, there's no place on the internet to that you can go look and see all of these things side by side, but I actually do I call them micro learning session. I do a micro learning session comparing the different values and principles and, the practices and things like that, because I think it's a really important discussion. That there are more out there. And the thing is that the important discussion is, why are they so important to us? Right. That's really what's important. There's so many organizations that we talked about that they have those corporate values, but they don't actually live them. They're really just a marketing slogan. And that's unfortunate because your values that defines your culture, defines your behaviors, your character. It defines so much about who you are. And if organizations are not really living their true values, their corporate values, that's kind of a shame, right? That's where they're putting dollar over people. Dollar's important. Let's not say that, that's not something we should consider, but the people are what drive the dollars, right? And that's what we want to try to get to, right?
Absolutely. The people, everything's about the people. So you are friends watching us right now on YouTube. We want you to ask any questions. We've got the chat box open. Please feel free to chat in any questions about Agile that you have. We would really love to address your questions live. Roy and I have about 5 minutes left before we hop off here. But before we do, Roy, we've got another topic that keeps coming up and people keep asking about, and it's the ACP exam, the Agile Certified Practitioner, which you and I have both taken. What do you see as the future of this exam? Do you think it has a future?
It's really interesting. I think some things are going to be coming out soon from the PMI that might change the direction of the ACP. I like the questions, and I like the folks that put together the ACP. There's lots of good content there. I don't know if there's really that much of a future for the ACP, quite honestly. I think there's value in the knowledge that you get from it. I don't know if there's value in the certification. What do you think, Phil?
I am so smack dab in line with what you're thinking, because I've been thinking based on what's coming down the pike from PMI regarding discipline Agile and the plethora of certifications they're going to be adding on, all the micro certifications they've already started putting together. I mean, honestly, it is so confusing, the amount of certifications they have right now for Agile and discipline.
And it's going to get worse.
It's just diluting what had some promise. But I'm not going to give them any ideas, Roy. We're not going to give them any ideas because we know how they can max this. But do they listen? That's the question. So I agree with you. I don't think there's much of a future for the ACP based on the dilution that is about to happen. I mean, it's just all over the place. But let's take a look, Roy, at this syllabus that they have, this domain. And let's just at a very high level, just talk about what exactly these mean, because we have people thinking about taking the Agile Certified Practitioner exam. And some people look at Scrum and they're like, oh, well, what's the difference? So what is the broad difference before we go into these domains one by one?
Yeah, so Scrum is just one of the practices, and unfortunately, a lot of people view Scrum equals Agile, Agile equals Scrum, and that's not the case. There's lots of different practices. Scrum is just one of them, and the ACP they did something right with this, and that is the ACP is broad across multiple practices, not just focused on Scrum. It's only one of the
Mhm,
practices that they talk about, and there's value in that, right?
mhm. So when we talk about these domains, I guess
Mhm.
it becomes a little apparent what they have done correctly. I like the way they have broken things out and it's
Yep.
not based on method. So let's talk about the Agile principles and mindset. I mean, you can get those from the Agile Manifesto and other related documents, but what do you think we mean by the mindset?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were just talking about, right? So those things that drive your behaviors, your actions, that's your minds, how you think about doing work,
Mhm,
how you think about relating to other people in your organization, how you think about building teams, how you build your organization. That's the agile mindset, and that's where the principles, mindset, the agile values. That's where all that stuff comes from. Interestingly, that it's only 16% of the overall in the ACB, because to me is one of the most important things that we
yeah,
talk about. But that's
would
just
have
me.
thought.
Yeah, it's okay. 16% is a pretty good percentage, right?
Ooh,
But it's about how we think about doing work, which is very different from what you would do in a traditional approach, right?
yeah, and Roy, honestly, I mean, we've talked about this before. So we've both taken this exam. You took yours before me. My
Yeah.
experience, I felt the principles and mindset were weighted more heavily. Now, I haven't been tracking the changes over the years,
Mhm.
but I had a lot more of the mindset than anything else. They might have actually taken that down a notch or two.
It's possible, Phil. Honestly, I didn't track it either, but I similar situation. I think that there was more of a focus on the principles, but I could be wrong about that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think our experiences tally in that regard. The second domain, value-driven delivery, I'm PMI touting this around a lot. So,
Hmm.
anything that they do, they put the value word behind it. So what does
Yeah.
value-driven delivery really mean? What should it really mean?
So it's a different approach from traditional. Traditional is where you define everything up front and you deliver all of it, right? So the intent is here's what you deliver everything. And that's worked and it continues to work in certain situations. But there are others where you may not necessarily have to do all of it. So the concept there is that you focus on the most important things first. You deliver those highest value items first,
Mhm.
and you don't worry as much about delivering all scope. You deliver the most valuable scope. And that's the intent with that. So it's a mindset shift, and that's one of the biggest challenges going from traditional to adaptive, the agile
Mhm.
processes. You're focusing more on delivering what's important rather than just delivering everything. That's a big mindset shift. So that's really the concept there. Focus, prioritize, focus on the important stuff, and get that stuff done.
Yeah, so don't come up with a scope baseline where everything has to be done, every
Yeah.
bit of it. No, different mindset. Stakeholder engagement. So to cut them some
Mhm.
slack, it seems like some pieces of one and three
Yeah.
might flush together, and some pieces of four might flush with one as well. So one, three, and four, I like that. It's a human
Mhm.
interaction piece. So stakeholder engagement pretty much speaks for itself. Team performance. Can you talk about three and four, just going back and forth between these?
Yeah. So real quickly, stakeholder engagement. Honestly, not that much dissimilar than from what you would do in traditional approaches. Keep your stakeholders engaged, but there are some differences. In an agile, more adaptive process, your stakeholders are going to be much more engaged, much more heavily engaged.
Mm,
Like the role of the product owner, which is a team member. They're engaged. They're from the business. Typically, that's what we want anyway, is a business person involved, and they are involved in the team on a regular, if not daily basis. So stakeholder engagement is much more significant in an agile approach than it would be in a traditional approach. And that kind of
mm,
brings us back to the team. So team performance, and I don't even really like the phrase team performance, because it's not about their performance, right? It's about building great teams, right? And performance is a side effect of that. If you build a great team, team satisfaction, happy team members, your performance is going to be higher as well. So it's really about how to build great teams, how to measure the performance of the teams, and not just performance as in producing a lot of stuff, but also performance as in improvement. How are they impacting or going in that direction? Does that make sense, Phil?
Yeah, it does, because performance could become it could become a bad word. It could,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. Let's talk about the concept of adaptive planning, of course, which is what Agile rests largely on, versus predictive planning.
Mhm.
What is adaptive planning?
Yeah, so the major difference between traditional approaches and the adaptive approaches, like agile concepts, is that we're not planning everything up front. Instead, we're going to learn. So we're going to do something. We're going to plan something. We're going to do it. This is PDCA, plan, do, check, act, right? So we plan to do something, we do it, we validate, and then we adjust. We make adjustments based on what we learn. So basically, a small experiment. Right. The experiment, we call them survivable experiments. We experiment expecting this to be the right thing and to survive the approach. But it may not. We might have discovered that something is not quite right, or that we need to adjust our planning along the way. And that's the concept of adaptive planning. We do a little experiment, learn from it, and then make adjustments to our plans as necessary along the way. Now, in the world of predictive, that's a no-no, right? Changing your plan is a big bad no-no. We don't change our plan. In fact, if anything, you learn and then you do what you have to get back onto your original plan,
Yes,
even though
exactly.
unfortunately it's often no longer valid, right? So that's one of the big differences.
Exactly. All right. And then continuous improvement, product,
Uh-huh.
process, people. You talked about PDCA. It's that cycle, but in Agile, it's accentuated. How is it accentuated in Agile?
Yeah, so we are doing this process in regular intervals, called iterations, right? So we do something, we look at how we performed, and then we make changes every couple of weeks or a week or 3 weeks, whatever your iteration cycle is. So as often as practical, we're going to look at
Mm,
how we're doing, and we continue to improve. Now, it's not just that one event in Agile. It's typically called a retrospective, or it could be called a Kaizen event if you're doing more lean or Kanban approaches. So it's always looking to improve, always looking at opportunities to get better. In traditional approaches, that's typically done more at the end of a project.
mm,
Lessons learned sessions, things like that. While valuable, usually too late. So
okay.
we basically take that concept and we do it all the time rather than doing it just at the end of a project.
Got you. And the last statement here, which reads product, process, people, it reminds me of something else we should talk about after this, which is the new PMP exam and their outline, which we'll take a look at. But can we just talk about the continuous improvement of the people piece, just a tiny little bit, just to get whet people's appetite for what we have on agileprinciple.com?
Yeah, absolutely. So we usually speak about how to improve the product. We sometimes talk about how to improve the process, but we rarely talk about how to improve people.
Mm,
And when we're talking about this, we're improving our teams, their interactions, making sure the teams have what they need, making sure that the team members have an opportunity to learn, improve their own skill sets, improve their interactions with other team members. So it is a people focused approach, not a process focused approach. So the people are doing the work, their interactions are important, the people themselves are important. We value them, their satisfaction is important. That's how we improve product and process and meet our goals, is to have great people. And if you don't spend time improving our people, and they're not going to ever get better, and you're going to get mediocrity as a result, or people leave, lots of turnover. So focus on your people. That's the intent.
focus on your people. We want to focus on you, our friends watching right now. Do you have questions that Roy and I can answer for you? Now will be a perfect, splendid opportunity for you. We don't have much time left on the show today. And in 2021, the PMI, they're bringing about this monumental change on the PMP exam. They're talking about 50% hybridized and agile and 50% predictive. So if you're not
Mhm.
up in your agile chops, now's the time to go to agileprinciple.com. The training that Roy and I have out there, you can learn for 6 hours solid agile basics to get you on your merry way to be able to face that beast. But speaking of that beast, let's take a look at this content outline that the PMI has put out. And let's see how it's broken out here to what we did with the ACP exam. So Roy, here's the people, process, and business environment. And in the training that we have on Agile Principle, we took each one of these and we blew it out into every single task to illustrate to people how they could practice this task in the world of Agile.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we talk about the business, I just want to go to the business for today. I mean, people can go to agileprinciple.com and sign up for the course. But regarding the business environment, let's just talk real quick, Roy, just to give people a little taste about the business piece. One of the things we talk about here is contracts and benefits, delivering benefits and value. How do you view the business environment in the world of Agile, especially when it comes to compliance,
Mm-hmm.
value, maybe the external environment and the impact it has on the business? How can we relate to that in Agile?
Yeah. So unfortunately, a lot of people view Agile as not considering things like
Exactly.
contracts and compliance and regulatory and legal, all those kinds of things that are actually really important to running most businesses. And we'd really like to encourage that that's absolutely not the case whatsoever. You absolutely can do. I do a lot of work in highly regulated industries, like pharmaceutical industries and physical safety gear and those kinds of things, which it's a
Mhm.
very regulated environment. So you absolutely can do Agile in those worlds, but you do it in a different way. You need to make sure that those things are considered up front, just like you would in traditional approaches. Maybe a little more upfront planning would happen in those highly regulated environments.
Mm.
And we also should let's talk about the contract aspect.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big one to me, because so many organizations, I work with a lot of companies that have very rigid fixed contracts, and fixed price, fixed scope, all that kind of viewing that these are really great contracts and save us from all kinds of problems. Well, actually,
Yeah.
there's so many studies out there that show that they're like the worst form of contract out there, and we
Mhm.
should take a very hard look. Even if you're doing traditional approaches, they don't work so great. So when you're in an Agile environment, it makes it even worse, because we want to
Mhm.
be flexible. We want to be able to change scope. We want to be able to change directions. And those contracts often put you in a box where you can't. So it significantly, seriously restricts what you can do in an Agile environment if your contracts don't match it, right? But those are some of the
Mm.
topics that need to be discussed, or you're going to have some challenges with your Agile practices, right, Phil?
Absolutely. A lot of challenges. And I believe, in all fairness, I can see where PMI is going with this and why they're
Yeah.
doing what they're doing. They want people to be more sensitized to
Hmm.
the world of Agile because it's becoming more and more predominant in the way we do business. I mean, you take a look at organizations these days, almost every firm has some sort of Agile component, either in IT. I mean, usually it's the IT folks who jump on
Yeah.
it first, but as you said, a lot of these other types of businesses, pharmacy and safety and stuff like that, they're beginning to incorporate it. So if you are looking at getting certified in 2021, well, like Roy and I have shown you, there's going to be a very strong component. And if you have not gotten your Agile chops together, you probably want to go to agileprinciple.com and sign up for training there that will give you roughly 6 hours of unfiltered, undiluted, really solid foundational stuff for what we just showed you. We showed you the PMI's PMP content outline. And trust me, there's a lot to be said. Roy covered every single one of those tasks in detail. So if that's something you're interested in, I would recommend going to agileprinciple.com. Roy, I do not see any chat, so it seems like we have come to the end of our show for today. No
Great.
chats. Well, I don't know if they knew that this was live. A lot of times they're used to seeing the show come on and it's all pre-done. But for the sake of those who may be watching, this is the 8th of September and it's 11:27. Speaking of which, Roy, you've got a meeting. You should probably round up. I've got one as well. So let's say goodbye to our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you. If you've not subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you've not been watching the Agile Principle Raw and Cut shows, we got a bunch of them. We got a lot of controversial topics, don't we, Roy?
Great topics. I love bringing out the controversy, because sometimes just teaching things can be a little boring. Bringing that controversy. We're talking about things that need to be fixed, right? That's the important stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you folks again soon. You take care and bye for now.